So I thought I'd start off by introducing why anyone want to do this. You can get some cool old machines. So I have two of them. This one is a Powermatic 10 Mortiser. So you know what the benchtop mortiser, you go like this with it. So I got one of those. And then when you go to pull the chisel out, the whole machine comes up off the bench. And I've never seen this on the videos, but the chisel really sticks to the wood when you pull in on the first cut. So we'll get some tips on that later. But this one's foot operated. So you actually push with your foot here, and this comes down here. It weighs around 1,200 pounds, would be my guess. Solid cast iron. From what I can tell for most of these tools, they were purchased by school systems, public schools, for their industrial arts departments. And then the janitors get them on surplus and sell them on Craigslist when they eliminate the IA programs. And I've seen that pretty consistently with some of the purchases that I've made. This tool I got from an industrial wood shop out in Franklin, Mass. I think that's where it is. Your sawmill out there is Franklin, Mass, right?
Pretty close, Bellingham.
Bellingham, yeah. So out in that area, I found it on Craigslist. It had a motor that runs with 3-phase power, 220 volts, and it's 1.5 horsepower. And you see those ratings on the motor itself, and you need to be very careful that you take the time to read those and make note of them as you're dealing with this stuff. The motor was rated to run at 3450 RPM, but because I'm using a variable frequency drive, I can adjust the speed of the motor. And so I run it at 1800, my philosophy being that the chisel and the drill won't get as hot for no reason. So I feel like a lowered speed is a good move. This motor had horrific bearings. So when I ran it, there was this squealing noise. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was the chisel and the drill interacting. It was the bearings. And so I found the holes for it, which are sort of like right under there and there. Everything comes apart. And the old tools have a grease fitting. So you take a grease pump and you put it in, and what you'll generally find is that no one ever greases the motor. So 50 years later, they're just in bad shape. I put in seal bearings, and I had a friend I know that is a machinist did it for me, which was really handy. He gets bearings for 10 bucks a pair. You buy them online for about $40 a pair, or you can go to a local shop in Providence and get them for around $100 a pair. So there's really an efficiency of buying in bulk and working with the right people on that thing. I did find a manual for this machine at vintagemachinery.org. Have any of you been to this site? Okay, so some of you know about it. There's a guy out of Atlanta that just sort of has a passion for old machines. He's super talented and just spends all his time restoring old machines. And it's sort of an addiction in and of itself, of course. This was $600, which ironically is the same price as a benchtop hollow chisel mortar that weighs 100 pounds. It's also about 50 cents a pound. So it was, in my view, kind of a neat thing to have, and I really enjoy it. It's good to work with. The basic operation is that here you could tighten the board to that back edge. I think these are hold downs there. And then you hold this knob to sort of hold the clamp against the board so it doesn't lift up and down. And you can adjust the table up and down with this and in and out with that. And then this moves it a little bit to the right. So you just kind of go, and you could conceivably go right through it. I found that putting some paraffin wax on the chisel made a huge difference on the retraction. And also it's really handy to not go full depth on your first cut, but to go half depth, go over half depth, and just, you know, I'm still figuring it out basically. But those are some of my tips on that tool. This one I have wired up to a VFD. This is actually the wire right here. We'll look at that in a minute. And to turn it on or off, I can't see it here because of the way this is up, but the old switch was right there. And so I walk over here and hit the switch on the VFD. think we're getting an adjustment.
That made it better. Just back the table up.
Forward, yeah. Nice, thanks. Yeah. So I just took the whole old switch off, put the cover plate back on, ran some brand new like 12-3 twisted wire from Home Depot over to this stuff, and it runs great. The next tool is a freakish tool. So when I got a Mortiser, I wanted the Mortiser. I had $600. I had a little money because we canceled our vacation from COVID and all that stuff. And he had this Millbury, Massachusetts tensioner that he wanted $500 for. And I kind of thought I would regret not buying it, so I bought it. And it's a remarkable piece of equipment. Here's mine. It's made of 3 parts. There's about a 300-pound motor in the back, dual shaft, so it drives on both sides. It's a honking thing, you know? The base is solid cast iron, one piece, also around 600 pounds. And this central block here with the mechanisms that make the thing adjust up and down is probably 900 pounds. This is a beast of a machine. I pinched my leg 2 years ago between the base and the thing. Like it got me, and I still have a mark. This is a cover that covers a blade here on the bottom and a blade on the top. And something happened over the years, so it broke here in the cast iron, and we welded it together and put some steel across. I would hate to have been there that day. Now, it could have just been a 2x4 coming down and whacking it because it wasn't built quite right. But there's cast iron scars all along this inside edge. So I am very concerned when I use it about safety. And so with this one, the VFD is up and behind, and I'll kind of mention when we get closer, but I put the switch to turn it on and off right here. This is a low voltage switch. And so I was thinking that if something bad went on over there, I would be hiding over here and still would be able to turn it off. Does that make sense? So this makes tenons. And before I came, I wanted to show you how it works. So I did, and I made this tenon. In a second, I'll show you the video of how I made it. It took about 10 seconds. It takes an hour to set up and 10 seconds to operate. So ideally you have a lot of cuts to do that are all exactly the same. Underneath is a picture, also from vintagewoodworking.org, of an engineer restored the machine to perfection. I mean, it is gorgeous. This one has a leather belt, like a leather serpentine belt that goes through, and it has some kind of psychotic clamping device that he explained how to tighten. And this guy used some sort of a vinyl belt. So the serpentine belt goes under and over on one side of the motor, which drives across here and spins an upper pair of blades and a lower pair of blades. And you can replace those with the carbide blades if you have $900 extra to blow through. But on the inside edge, there's a secondary, you can see the wheel here, there's a secondary set of serpentines that do 2 things. And you would think about window frames or door moldings for this. Inside here, behind here, you can mount coping blades. So basically, you're cutting the tenon, and then on one edge, you'll cope like a quarter round or an OG. And then lastly, there's a blade that's about a 5-inch spinning, just looks like a table saw blade, that you could cut the length of the tenon. So with one swipe, you would get a tenon, a cope, and cut it to length. It's a pretty amazing tool, but all the bearings on that side are locked up on mine, and I don't need that. I just thought I would do the tenoning first. So it just depends on having the time to restore and whatnot. But it's a really interesting tool. To raise and lower the blades, you have to loosen 4 bolts on the back, and then there's a raising knurled nut on the bottom here, and one on the top, and there's like a Sharpie marker that says turn to the right to go up or down. It's a little bit confusing, And you really want to get it just right. If you look at the tenon that's going around, ideally your cheeks are the same on both sides of it. And so if you did all of your wood 3/4 inch forever, you could have 1/4 inch cheeks on both sides and never touch it again. But if you ever did a different size piece of stock, you really have to be careful about whether you want to adjust it or if you want to have different cheeks. One of the mistakes I made in a project was I was like, it'll be fine. It's just a tenon. But the only thing that matters is the same size as the mortise. If that's the case, you just have to make sure that you keep the thin side on the same side. Because as you flip it to do the other side, if you go thin, thick, you'll have a little thing that no one will notice except you, but it'll drive you nuts. So that's the tenoner. And I don't know how to do this, but there's a close-up of it. You can't just put a file on this plate. You need something that's gonna go like that. It's like a 4-degree program. There's a company in Connecticut that will do it. I think if I click, it'll play a video. Yeah, well. This is 2 hours ago, holding the camera in my left hand, holding the board down in my right hand. That's how you make a tenon. And that's the one you're seeing as we pass around. I think that's kind of it about the tools. Let me just check. Yeah. So any questions on the tools so far? Yeah.
Yeah, so if you mark your boards with a face mark.
Yep.
And you want to be consistent. I don't know if it's the bottom part of the tenon or the top one. If you want to be able to take 1/4 inch, because not all lumber is true 3/4, probably give or take in here. If you always do that, mark it with the face, you set it up with the face in the same direction all the time, you should be consistent with your tenon, right?
That's right. Yeah, and I have a little tip for myself here. I write face down.
Same as when you work with alcohol.
Yeah.
Face side all the time, either against the fence on the table saw or whatever. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So that would work perfectly. No matter what thick it is, even if it's twice as thick, you still get it consistent.
As long as you flip it like this when you're done and don't go like this.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and on table saw.
Yep. Yep.
How do you move these 1,200-pound machines?
I've got some pictures on that. Yeah. I'll go through that on that slide. It's an important topic. Yeah.
Yeah, so was this in Millbury that you got it? Or?
It was in Franklin.
Okay, so that's close to Millbury.
Yeah.
So how many of these machines did they make? Do you have any idea? Or?
No, I don't know that. It's not. I did once have a Parks planer that apparently was very prolific. Sears sold them and everyone had one. These are really, people really love them from what I've read in the forums, more so than the Powermatic version. It really holds square is my understanding. And this one, I got it for 500. I saw the actual sales receipt for one, this from the 40s. It was around 3,500 brand new. So it's like a 50,000 or so machine if you factor in inflation. It's definitely a finger remover, a maimer. My shop teacher said hand tools will hurt you, power tools will maim you. And this is one of those, that gleaming blade is really something in and of itself.
Where do you have these beasts?
In the basement.
In the basement?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll show you some stuff. How do I get them is an interesting question. So I just thought, because I'm kind of a tech guy, I'll give you some acquisition tips. So if you're using Craigslist, a little funny thing is that on your keyboard, kind of above the shift key, there's a character called pipe. It looks like 2 vertical lines or 1 vertical line. And that means or. So this search would be Delta or Northfield or, throw some misspellings in, Northfeld. You can get some really good deals for people who don't know how to spell, by the way, because no one finds stuff. Putting quotes on multi-word, or else it'll bork the whole thing. And I said your mileage may vary, because this is kind of funny. I think what happens, and some people who did database work maybe the company, but if you say Delta and then quote Walker Turner and then or Northfield, this is seen as one thing. But if you don't put the quotes on it, I think what it means is Delta or Walker, Turner or Northfield. And so you get different number of results. So you try it one way, you try it the other way, you should get the same results if you know what you're doing. But if you find you get 120 with one and 80 with the other, you're doing something wrong. And one last is I always put the double word ones at the end because it tends to not mess it up as much. Does any IT people have anything to add to that? Because I think that's a pretty common. Is this all common knowledge too, or is this helpful?
No, in this crowd?
So what I did was I went into Craigslist. They just put this in for the fun of it. I went into Craigslist and I said, I want tools, I want vintage, I put all the categories in. And so this is the query. So I'm saying Starvit, Anvil, Oliver, Olivier, Power Dramatic, Rockwell, Delta, Northfield, Yates. And then I wanted Clamp or Clamps, Walker for Walker Turner, Mortiser. And then I'm excluding all these categories, like cars and stuff. And then I sort by relevance and whatever. So there it is. I put that all in. I typed in the pipe separated things that I'm interested in. And I hit search. Then in the address bar at the top, I just pull that down to my bookmark bar. And I named the bookmark Old Arn, which is that kind of keyword for iron. And so whenever I wanted to see what's out there, I hit Old Arn. And then there's all this old stuff that makes me drool over old equipment. And sometimes I find some neat stuff. So hopefully that's helpful. I think these tips might, I'll send you the whole presentation.
Where did those excludes come from?
It comes from the sidebar where it says, what are you looking for? Like bicycles or car tires or a dating relationship? So if you just, if you say exclude everything, and then you just turn on tools, household items or whatever, it doesn't have an include, it just says exclude. Does that make sense?
Well, but where did the codes come from?
And that's just what gets submitted when you just uncheck different things.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know anything about that other than I use their form.
Yeah.
And then it actually, whatever you choose in the search form is what they call posted. It gets posted into this URL. So whatever you search for, you can share with someone else. They could click the link and see what you see.
So they're not typing actually what we see is typing, right?
Well, I'm typing this part, Delta or Walker Turner or North.
Yeah, but the lower thing. You
Yeah.
didn't type that.
No,
That's just
no.
what the software is, right?
The software wrote that one. I just unchecked the little boxes. Yeah.
And you just used the Providence Craigslist. You didn't check or search.
And see, I found some really interesting things by just, it's funny if you can find a word that yields good results. Wife is an interesting one because a lot of times people will say, my wife doesn't want this anymore. And so just by chance, that word happens to yield things that men sell that their wife doesn't want. Divorce is another one that can somehow just yield to house clearings and stuff like that. So you can have some fun with it. It's kind of neat.
Do we want to know why you started searching for wife over?
I read an article, of course. Okay, and then getting it. So I got it in my 1500 pickup truck, which really isn't rated for this amount of weight, but we held it down. The seller had a forklift, and I got these for $10 at Lowe's. They're really cheap, these ratchet clamps. The machinery is mounted to pallets. It's screwed to pallets with really hardcore screw guns. So that was all done right. And for safety, you have to keep in mind, you could get into an accident. You could need to brake quick. Someone might hit you. And you ought to make sure that, you know, that this doesn't hurt you or anyone else in the process. So that's what it looks like on the truck on a beautiful day in September of
So you had
2021.
both those machines in the truck at the same time?
Yep. I had to get it home, get it in the house before it rained. The great Archimedes said, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. And so that was my thing. Years ago, I found a basketball hoop with a sand base, and my son was 5 years old, and I was like, great, it's free. I'll just pick it up, put it in the truck, and $500 of physical therapy later, pulling my back. I really should have done it the right way and just bought one. But I learned my lesson there, and I'll share some of the things I did. So I call this the chip drop. So have you heard of chipdrop.com? Do you guys need mulch in your yard ever? I'll put in a little sales pitch. If you go to chipdrop.com, it connects arborists who need to get rid of wood chips with homeowners who need wood chips. So instead of driving back to Gloucester and dumping it off, they just show up with 6 or 10 yards of chips, unload it in your driveway, and get back to the neighborhood where they're working. It's a neat little free service. It's usually way too much chips for anyone, but what I did is, as you can see, I took the base off it and as many parts as I could get off it. And then I backed up the truck to a 3-foot high pile of wood chips and just rolled it onto it. Once it's rolled onto it, I can use other devices to move it around. And that part I did alone, and it came out okay. This is the next one. So here it is, clamped onto a pallet, covered with, what's that stuff called, MDF boards?
MDF.
Particle, some kind of particle board. That's about 3 inches wider than the door frame on each side. So if the pallet slides down at 45 degrees and hits the door frame, it'll stop right there. Then I'm using a steel cable connected to a 73 Gravely 812 that weighs about 1,500 pounds, driven by Malcolm, 15 years old, also 100 pounds. Getting him off the cell phone to just listen to me involved a couple of conversations. Just, I told him he's not allowed to hurt himself, no matter what happens. But he also needs to listen. And if I yell, it's not because I'm mad, I just need to be heard. And it needs to be taken seriously. So he was backing up. When this is teetering on the edge there, it's getting ready and it's going to go. Once it hits 45 degrees, it's basically the weight versus the coefficient of friction. So this went well. And my point here is you are fragile and so is cast iron. So if something goes wrong here, it could be you, it could be the cast iron, it could be just a waste of time, basically. But this went well. And so when it stopped, then I put a board, like a piece of plywood here to sort of create a natural ramp and got it through the door. And that worked pretty well. People here recommended that I hire, what are the movers called? Riggers. So I got some piano movers that came one day and they moved in a 12-inch planer. It's 4 guys, rough crew. The owner and his son, pretty normal. A guy with only half of his teeth and a guy with a really long pinky nail.
Don't know what that was.
I think it's for cocaine, but I'm not really sure. And they put straps over their shoulders and under the tool and were able to lift and pull down, right? When they got to the edge of this piece right here, now you're fitting 4 250-pound men in this little channel. And these guys were not avid communicators. One of the big discussions was, do we go down like this or like this? So do you know how we decided this dilemma?
Like gravity decided for you?
The first guy that said, fuck it, let's go, decided. He liked it this way, and there was no turning back at that point. And I remember reaching up over the 4 of them to stop the tool like this, because it was bad. So I don't know. I think this rigged method where you go slow and have a plan is better than a bunch of guys crowded into a bulkhead. But that's how I got it in. And it was kind of the same for each of the components. Take lots of pictures so you know how to put it back together afterward. Now these are the VFDs. I am using Tico Westinghouse L510s. And I got some notes on that at the end to kind of describe what and why. They're around $250 a piece. And if you plug it into wire to power, it'll be on forever, saying it'll blink 60 hertz. I'm really weird about phantom power and electrical economy. So this one I plugged in with an on-off switch. So if I turn it off, this doesn't blink like that because I'm not going to use it every day. I kind of thought that would work well. And so far it's been fine. I've not used it for months in a row and it has not forgotten my settings. That's the key thing. If the battery dies inside, I think it might forget your settings. But just to point out some of the differences here, this goes to the Mortiser. And so when this is on, if you want to turn it on, you press run. Whereas on the Tenon, it's the same device. These are low powered switches down here. And so here I have just some speaker wire. And so you read the manual and figure out what, but that switch that I showed you down at the bottom relays to here and actually replaces this run button. But you have to go into the settings to tell it to do that. So I'll just pass around the manual because, wow. Have fun with that. This is all extremely technical stuff. All I can say is that what I did was everything I customized, I wrote in the red pen to help me. And it was only about 3 things. But there's a lot in there. What's nice about the Tico Westinghouse is that there's a guy on YouTube who is an electrical engineer, explained how to set it up for his lathe. And he has like 3 or 4 videos. They're about a half hour each. And he just walks through exactly how to set it up. And you won't get that support anywhere else, basically. You won't understand the rest. So those are the 2. To change the settings, you basically hold enter for 3 seconds to go into a mode. So if you wanted to go into like option 12, how fast it runs, you go mode up to 12, press and hold enter, change it from setting 1 to setting 2 by going up, and then press and hold enter to set that. And then press enter again to get out or something like that. And then it would be set like once and for all. It's not user friendly, but it's just 3 buttons and it's kind of like old school electronics. Oh, there's the low voltage switch. I got this for $15 from Amazon. It had the housing and the switch. There's nothing about these switches that's fancy. It's only running like 12 volts basically. So when you press on, it's just relaying go on. It's not actually running the full house voltage through. And as I mentioned before, I was concerned about safety with this, so I put the switch where I would be if bad stuff happened. All right, so getting it, I'm almost done, by the way. And 3-phase inversion, I'm no expert, but here's what I've learned. So I guess the basic 2 options are the traditional one is rotary inversion. And this is like a machine in your house, we're talking thousands of dollars that you would have, and it spins and converts single phase into 3-phase. I think if you guys know Frank Howarth, I think his wood shop probably has a rotary inverter because he has a lot of like big, heavy, like, you know, his sander that's this wide, the disc sander, that's probably a 5 horsepower motor. And so VFDs are more like $100 to $200, somewhere in that range. You can buy them on Amazon. I bought mine from Safeway Electrical Motor in Providence. It's like one of those places I go in, the guy's smoking cigarettes inside the shop. There's no air conditioning in the middle of summer. He's giving me all the insider tips. But you know, he does cash pricing on stuff too, so I don't have any receipts or anything. But like it's, he helped me figure out how to set it up a little bit. He said, don't do it for more than 3 horsepower. So if you find like some honking huge planer, this might not be a good option, but he felt like for the 2 horsepower and the 1.5, it's fine. Someone said I could just run both tools off 1 VFD and save some money. And I think that's kind of possible, but I have different settings for each one. So I don't know how that would really work. I want to run one at full and one at partial. And then this is the engineer who talks about the Tico Westinghouse 510 Flow 42. He has good search engine ratings, so if you search for VFD, he'll come up too, but I thought that would be good in the notes if anyone's interested. And then let's see if there's anything else that I was thinking of, which is, oh, so VFDs would be really great. People really love them for high-powered drill presses. You can run a tap through it and run it at a really low speed. It's full power at a low RPM. And you can go forward, backward on the switch. So you say, turn it on, go forward, it goes down, tap back out like that. You can't do that with regular power. That's one of those
So it
advantages.
changes like that.
It can. So on my frightening machine, I have it turn on over 5 seconds. So it goes like this instead of that's helpful in and of itself. I'm pretty sure this is my last slide, but I'll hit the button and it is. So any questions?
So if you had a 3 horsepower saw stop table, that's a 3-phase, all those table saws, 3 horsepower. Single phase.
Usually single phase on modern tools.
So why the phases, just in general? If you've got 1.5 horse, I mean, that's not.
So 3-phase is more efficient than single phase, and in industrial environments like big kitchens or factories, they have 3-phase power. My understanding is that it applies the power at 3 points on the motor instead of on 1. So it's like juice, juice, juice in 1 rotation. And so it gets a lot of power. Mine were, and you got to get all the different things right. Horsepower, volts. So 220 means 2 positive leads from your circuit breaker. And I have all my 220s running on 1 pair of circuits because I never run the table saw and the tenon at the same time. I'm a one-man shop. But if you have a lot of people working at once, you need to separate them out because they're pretty good tools. Jim.
So can you change the speed on the fly, or do you need to program it in a specific speed for each machine?
I've never done it, but I think this knob lets you do it right here.
Usually, Jim, can you hear me?
It should be. That makes
You should be able,
Yeah.
because that's the whole purpose of a VFD is to vary it. Is
Yeah.
To be able to vary it while it's in operation.
Yeah, I just think you have to be in whatever mode that the potentiometer relates to. We got a question coming in from the phone.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I have a Tico VFD for my lathe, which I put in a couple of years ago, and just a couple notes. You can, in fact, work with the voltage a bit with the VFDs. So you can power it with 110. And secondly, the big advantage when you're using a lathe is, of course, the reversibility. The other comment would be, to answer the other question, is that usually with the Ticos, you have a place to put a external potentiometer to control the speed, which is what I did with my lathe, and that's really useful for a lathe. I mean, that's really important.
One of these things, you could put the potentiometer in
Yeah, exactly.
and have it integrated with your controls.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing, when you said you could run it, you were thinking that you can't run it 2 devices with 1 VFD. You're absolutely right, because the settings tend to be so customized per the motor that you have that you just can't swap them. It's just be unless they're identical maybe, but I don't think you'd ever have that situation.
Even the switch that says, it's like $100 for the switch that says transfer the power to.
Yeah, it's not worth it. I wouldn't do it either.